So the first one you guys had was around minerals and parasite dewormers for cows, pigs, cats, dogs, chickens, stuff like that. So I'll deal with the mineral first. We when we first started out with our mineral stuff, uh, we had quite a struggle trying to figure out what to give them. And the thing that I've settled on uh, the most is starting out with giving them free choice of as many different kinds of minerals as you can, different kinds of salt. If you can get individual minerals and even like bentonite and kelp meal. Um, at one point, the I literally had like a buffet uh, mineral feeder style where it was like 12 different things. And I laid it all out in front of them and just kind of let the animals decide what they liked best. And, after a few weeks of that, we just found that, they really preferred certain things and they didn't really eat any others. And then that helped us to narrow it down. But depending on kind of what your individual soil types are like and the plant species that they're grazing on, you can really have a wide variety of what's missing from their diet. So I think the best approach is to let the animals kind of tell you what they need. um, and so we started out with that, and what we found is there's a blend that we can get from our local feed store. It's a certified organic blend from the Wetaskiwin Co-op. I'm sure you guys can get that too. I think it's called um, it's like Pasture Pro or something like that, but it's soy-free, organic, all that stuff. And then we give them just a regular salt mix that we've played around with different versions of salt too, whether it's the Redmond salt or you can get a agricultural Sifto salt from those guys as well. But again, the principle there is just let the animals decide, give them three different kinds of salt. Because years ago when we were using, I think it was like the blue salt that has the cobalt in it, and we were having a lot of hoof problems with our cows. And someone just recommended, well, you should try switching it up to the iodized ones. And as soon as we did that, we didn't have any issues. So that's where I kind of like is just, get three different kinds of salt licks, a bunch of different mineral blends, break it out if you can. Ideally, you're not building your own custom mineral because it's quite complicated. You can't just find a blend, but you could try all different blends to see what they like. Um, and then what you'll find is really neat is that after uh, our cows use less and less mineral every year. And on some pastures, they don't use any mineral, and those are our best pastures. And on other pastures, they eat a little bit, and some they'll eat, two or three times as much as the next one. So it's fun when you like if we try to only give them enough mineral that they eat in a day, and that way you can really get a gauge of kind of what their nutritional needs are from the pasture and whether they're being met. And that's one of the uh, big benefits I've seen to doing cover crops and stuff like that is of all the different grazing that we've done, it's the cover crops where they eat the least amount of mineral. And we've got about 30 head right now, or 30 to 40, including calves and yearlings at our peak. And yeah, when we put them onto cover crop, they won't eat any mineral for a week sometimes if it's really diverse. Versus our poor pastures, they'll eat, I don't know, probably 50-pound bags in maybe a month, something like that. The other thing that I find really interesting about mineral is whenever I bring in a new cow, which I only do for my dairy animals, is they'll sit at the mineral feeder for 2 or 3 days, and I'll think it's going to bankrupt me because they'll just eat pretty much half bag of mineral a day if it's a new cow. But if I let them do it, I just keep it topped up, and after a week of that or so, they go back to just nibbling it here and there as they need it. So I do think animals know what's best for them. There's some great stories about cows. Um, Actually, this is why we first started using bentonite as a mineral additive, which Redmond salt has some really cool conditioners and salts and things like that they sell. but they advertise that their where they get their salt and minerals from now. I don't know, 100, 200 years ago, there was different kind of feedlots in the area, or ranches, and at the time bullets were really expensive. And so if a cow got sick, they wouldn't even put it down. They would just open the gate and let it go out into the desert. And at this particular ranch, they found that after a month or so, the cows that they'd let out would come back and they'd be in better condition than the cows that were in the feedlot. And so one day they let a cow out and followed it, and they found it went to this kind of bluff out in the middle of the desert and just was sat there and just ate clay for days. And after a certain point, it got, it just stopped, and then it walked back to get let back into the pens. And so then they started mining that and bringing it and feeding it to the cattle. So yeah, cows know what they need. The other cool thing I'll share is I've heard of other ranchers and folks that have been doing rotational grazing for years, where they get to the point where they don't even feed mineral anymore because the cows just won't even eat it. And I think that's the ultimate is when you can get to that point where your pastures are that healthy, that and your nutrient cycling is that quick that they're getting everything from the farm. So yeah, any follow-up questions from on that from you guys' group there, Katie?
No.
You guys are muted there, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, you're good.
Can you hear us? Yeah. I think that answers a lot, a lot of information.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great on the mineral. And also
Great.
the parasite dewormer too.
Yeah, so I'll touch on that. So we haven't used any apart from diatomaceous earth, which is a certified organic mineral. It's basically just they're little diatoms that live at the bottom of the oceans. They mine them from old oceans, and it's basically like powderized razor blades. And you can use that as an internal parasite cleanser or an external one, like on their backs. And we've used it on and off, but by and large, what we found is the most effective thing is management. Understanding whatever the pest that you're trying to deal with, whether it's lice or intestinal parasites or whatever it is, ringworm for pigs or fluke, just do research on it, figure out what it needs to thrive, and then make sure that your management breaks that. So this is one of the best things about rotational grazing is that if you're moving your animals properly, the which is basically typically it's at least a 30-day rotation before the cows are back to where they were before. And as long as you're doing back fencing, which is putting up some kind of a fence that stops them from getting back onto land that they were grazing before. Typically, I do that every 4 days. And we can get into the details around that later. But as long as you're doing that, you basically eliminate all parasites in cattle. Because every single parasite that cows have has some kind of a life cycle where they need to be eaten or when they hatch, the animals need to be, whether they're pooped out or peed out or they fall off of them, the animals need to the parasites have to gestate in that area, and then the animals have to be there when they're ready to get back to complete the cycle. So as long as you break that cycle, whatever it is, which I don't think any of them are more than 30 days in our area, you don't have parasites anymore. And we've actually done studies with the University of Alberta. They did an intestinal parasite comparison. They were comparing kind of conventional farms with organic rotational grazing operations. And so they came out for a whole summer and did multiple basically fecal samples of the cows. And our herd basically showed like super low numbers, like a level that let them know, okay, there are parasites here, but the levels are so low in terms of the number of eggs that are in the manure that it proves that your cows have, they said resistance. It wasn't resistance to parasites, it was good management. And so I would say the same thing for anything, whether you're dealing with pigs or chickens or horses or whatever it is, just understand whatever the pest cycle is and figure out how to break it. I'll give you another example with lice. We used to always have trouble with lice with our beef cattle particularly in the spring. And what we found is that by two things with if we could, we started to overwinter them where our pigs and chickens are, so that the pigs and chickens are constantly turning up the bedding material all winter. And that bedding material is where the lice basically incubate in there. And so by the chickens scratching around and eating them and the pigs rooting it up and causing the eggs to freeze, there's no way for them to incubate in the warm bedding pack so that in the springtime they could all hatch out and just go after the cows. And then if we are, so that's one way is have integrated, pest management with chickens or pigs. Or if you can't have that, move the bedding packs and rotate those around, which is also a good practice for your nutrient management. Because if you got portable windbreaks that you can, whatever field you're going to be spreading the manure on in the spring, if you got your portable windbreaks out in that field, it's just a lot easier for you to spread manure from that central location versus if it's always in the same corral every year and you're having to truck it to your farthest field. It's not ideal. Now, of course, that requires having water and other things out there, but that would be a general strategy, is just try to rotate your bedding packs. And since doing that, we don't have lice problems anymore. And that was really the only thing we ever had issues with. And it wasn't bad. There was a couple cows that would have some, lose some hair in the spring. But with my pigs, every year when my butcher comes out, he says, I can't believe how healthy your pigs' organs are. Because when they're trained as butchers, they're trained to identify parasites in the organs, and he says you have cleaner pigs than the hog barns, and part of that is just the management, because we don't do we don't give any chemicals of any kind apart from just management and good food. And so yeah, those are some examples there with the pigs and cattle. And if anyone has any questions about chickens, I could dive in there too. But I think you guys get the gist of it.
That's the question.
Yes.
How often do you do or give diatomaceous earth? Is it like a free choice thing, or is it like a monthly thing, like with the cycle of the parasite?
Yeah, we don't really do it anymore. It's a real pain in the ass to try to apply it. Like they don't like to eat it. So if you are gonna try to use it internally, you have to find a way to mix it into whatever they're eating. So that would be like, a grain treat or something like that. But they don't like it. And to me, it's not addressing the root cause of the problem. That's why we stopped doing it. It's still treating symptoms. So like in an extreme situation, you could, try to find some way for them to eat it by mixing it with grain or whatever. But yeah, ideally we don't even do that anymore.
Have you ever used activated charcoal as a treatment for anything?
We're starting to. Yeah, I've found a good supplier out of BC that you can get like bulk bags. What would it be? Probably 500 or 1,000 kg bags for like just a few $100. And so we did some trials this year with our animals where we were mixing it into the feed that we give them. I also sell chicken and pig feed as well, but I wanted to use my own animals as the guinea pigs and not other people's for this. But after a year of doing that, we haven't seen there's no downsides. And I mean, every year our animals get better. And so I can't say it's this thing for sure, the charcoal, but yeah, everyone says this is the best pork and the best beef they've ever had. So I don't think it hurts. It certainly wouldn't hurt. And at a minimum, even if it does nothing for the animals, I think there's value in doing it just for the helping to create surface area for microbes to live in, so that it's like as a soil amendment. And you're getting your animals to be your fertilizer spreaders for you, which is always fun.
So that was given free choice. That wasn't you didn't.
That was mixed into the chicken and our hog feed was mixed in. We didn't give it to our beef cattle this year, but I do know a guy that does give free choice. I think it's free choice activated charcoal. And he swears by it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to uh, go even a layer deeper with the parasites and stuff. Like I used to do like herbal antiparasiticals. There's like absinthe wormwood or garlic or vinegar and stuff like that. And but what I've gotten to is those are like emergency situations that like if something gets away on you. But ideally you want to, if you're having parasite issues, research whatever that parasite is, figure out what its life cycle is and how to change your management so that you are addressing the, and this is something from holistic management, there at any organism's life stage, whether it's a weed or a parasite or even animals or garden plants, there's a weak point in its life cycle when there's points where it's like really really strong. Like say for example, if you have you ever had like a wood tick on you, you can't crush, like you can almost, you need like a razor to cut them. They're so hardy, right? Once they're adults because they've got all that armor on them. So that's not their weak point. Their weak point is when they're, in the egg stage. And that's typically what most animals are. It's either in the egg or the larva stage. So that's another strategy, is like find the weak point within its life cycle. And that's the point that you would try to intervene. And same thing for weeds or any other plant that you're trying to manage. Okay. I've got we've also got a question here from from YouTube, and this is I want to thread this in because this is a key piece to think about when you guys are like for how to break that life cycle, because if you're doing rotational grazing, you're going to run into the issues of, well, how do we get them to have access to water without and also meet those other criteria of not having the animals come back to that same spot within 30 days and not having them on the same piece of ground after 4 days. So that really creates some challenges with the with watering. And so I've got a resource doc that I'm going to share here, and I just got to pull it up. If there's any other questions related to the parasites while I'm getting this, feel free to shout them out there, folks.
It'd be great to hear what your idea the weakest point of thistles would be.
It actually, I would say their weak point is when they're in their flowering stage. That's when cows, like even cows, will eat them. They'll actually go, and we've without even training them, our cows will go through and pick the flower buds off of thistles right before they burst. Now, of course, this might only happen for 30 minutes at any one time, depending on the season that you've got. Other times they'll stay, in buds for a few days. Or the other point is I've heard of guys mowing them right before a rain. And so like you cut them down, it has to be a clean cut. You can't do it with like a brush hog or a mower, like a slasher. It has to be like some kind of a sickle mower. So it's a nice clean cut, so that the stems are open in the top. And right before a rain, and apparently the rain will get down inside there and rot out the root. One of my old holistic management mentors taught me that. So that's one strategy. However, what I'll offer is another strategy there, which is, so thistles are super high in protein. I think they're like 20% protein, and you can teach your cows to eat them. There's a really great, I think her name is Kathy Voss. She's a contributing editor for On Pasture. And there's a bunch of other guys if you search online, but there's basically a process for teaching cows or any animal to eat almost any plant in the world within 7 days or less. And it probably takes like less than 7 hours. And I think it's like less than a couple $100. And basically what you do is, if you've got kids, it's the same idea. As you start with something they really like, and you feed them in one container, and it's say get like a really bright red container, like one of those old lick tubs or something, and you put like a treat they've never had, and so it has to be something they've never had before. So alfalfa cubes, and you want to get different shapes, different colors, different flavors, like wet stuff, dry stuff. And every day you give them a new thing they've never had before in that tub. And you figure out what they like, and you keep switching it up. And eventually by like day 3 or 4, I can't remember what it is, they're like super excited to come get this treat. And on that day, you start to introduce little bits of weeds, whatever it is you're trying to get them to eat. And it has to be at the stage that you want them to eat it. So like, say, for example, the thistles are, the thistles are going to be in flower in a week. So you would start training them like a week before, and then so that you time it so that by the time on the 7th day, where the only thing they're eating is thistles, then they go out and you let them into like you strategically move your grazing so that they're on the next piece right there, and you let them in. And there's videos of guys doing this. It's phenomenal. Like and what's cool about this, if you're thinking, well, that sounds like a pile of work, if you do it with your older females, particularly, they'll train their young, and then you get it into the herd, and then you've encoded it into your herd forever. And I've heard some like phenomenal. There's an old Alberta ag tech who claims, and I've heard it out of his own mouth, that he trained cows to eat water hemlock, which is the most poisonous plant in the world. Now he claims that you have to do it at a certain stage of the plant where it's not poisonous, which I can't remember what that is, so don't try this at home. But he says he's done this several times, and he's used cattle as effective management to even get rid of that toxic of a plant. So if whatever weed you're dealing with, whether it's knapweed or thistles or anything, I would really encourage you to play around with that as a strategy to train your animals to do it. And I think you'd have a lot of success with that. So yeah, it was Kathy Voss on pasture, teaching your animals to eat weeds. There's also quite a bit of research that's been done on like the nutrient content of different weeds. That's really interesting. If you are like, for example, I was working on a 30,000 acre ranch near Kamloops a couple years ago, doing some consulting, and they had a spotted knapweed problem. And of course, they were helicopter spraying it and doing all this stuff. And I wrote a proposal that like the spotted knapweed was the most valuable forage on this 30,000 acre ranch, because everything else was basically, rocks or dried grass. And at a certain time of the year, it was literally 20% protein, which is higher than alfalfa. So that's what's funny. Another thing I'll say about weeds is think of them as an indicator of the health of your ecosystem. So if you take your arm and you cut here, you burn here, you pinch here, you crush here, you put salt here, you put acid here, and you just do a bunch of different things to your arm, different wounds will come up in every one of those points. You'll have, blood blisters, you'll have bruising, you'll have inflammation, you'll have swelling, you'll have scars, you'll have scabs. Those are all different responses to different traumas for your body. Weeds are the same thing. And so there's been research that's been done where they'll take 100 square feet of ground, they'll break it into 10 square foot blocks, and they'll burn one, they'll salt one, they'll compact one, they'll flood one, they'll put chemicals on one, and they'll over fertilize one, and they'll put too much of something else, 10 different things. And it's all the same ground. And literally you can see 10 different weeds growing in these blocks right next to each other. So weeds are in the same way that we have our own immune responses to trauma. That's what weeds are for the environment. So if we start to see them as indicators of what's gone wrong and what needs to be repaired in the ecosystem, they can be phenomenal tools and helpers for us. And so So that's the first one is they're indicators, and the second one is they are the repair. So they're not there because they're trying to get you, or that they're going to take over. They're there because they're doing something and that they're needed. And I've seen this in ecosystems where they'll like bulldoze an area, burn it, and it'll be nothing but thistles for the first 2 years. And after 2 years, the thistles all of a sudden die out, and then these beautiful forest will come back from the understory, and you'll never see thistles there again. I've seen thistles where I used to do the Joel Salatin style chicken tractor, where I moved the chicken tractor every few days, and literally the next year there was perfectly square or perfectly rectangle blocks of thistles that only grew where I had my chicken tractor parked. So thistles are an indicator of typically two things: compaction or excess nitrates or nitrogen in the soil. The third one is disturbance, like too much disturbance. And typically anything with thorns, it's basically giving you the middle finger, saying, get away from here. We need some space to heal. And so anything with like netted or clumped roots, it's there to help grab the soil if there's too much disturbance. Tap roots are for compacted soil. And what's really interesting, watch this. Where do you see tansy grow the most? Tansy, burdock, like the really nasty ones. They typically grow where there was a lot of animal impact, but typically where there was like old corrals, where there was a lot of chemicals used, like porons, Ivomec. And it's what's interesting is that those same plants this is another tip. If you want to figure out what the plant's doing in the ecosystem, research its herbal functions for humans, because it'll pretty much be the same. So if it's used as it helps to detoxify, like burdock, what's it doing in the environment? If it's something like dandelion, which is what's the name of it? No, what's the name of the plant? I can't remember now. There's a certain grass, and it's used to get rid of kidney stones. In your body, helps to break up kidney stones. And so what does it do? It helps to decompact like soil and break up if there's like lots of calcium deposits, I think. So it's really, this is one of my two favorites, fireweed. Fireweed is one of the most effective herbal medicines for burns. They're literally using it in hospitals. There's Robert Rogers. He's a famous Alberta herbalist. He was actually developing a sunburn spray made out of I think it was not a tincture, but an infusion of fireweed. So what does fireweed do in the environment? It grows after fire. There's another one called water lettuce, which is also comes up after fires. And what it does for humans is it's similar to an opium. It has another pathway to block opiate receptors or sort of pain receptors in our body, but it does it without opiates. And so it literally is there to help numb the pain of the ecosystem after a burn, and it does the same thing for us. So yeah, those are some thoughts to think about when you're looking at weeds. And there's some fantastic books. There's like Weeds and What They Tell. There's lots of resources online if you got a specific weed that you're dealing with. But that's what I would take a look at is think of them as helpers that are there to repair the ecosystem and move it to the to the next stage of succession. So I know I'm getting sidetracked here from the original thing I was going to share, but I want to share an image from one of our resource docs. So folks are familiar with this idea of ecosystem succession, where there's a disturbance, there's not a lot of soil health, and then these pioneer organisms come in, and this is the establishment phase. So tend to be low diversity. The plants are short-lived. They're typically very nasty type plants, like they're thorny, they're grabby, there's burrs. And then basically as you go along, the plants get softer, longer lived, more wimpy. Everyone knows how hard it is to get apple trees and fruit trees and stuff to grow. But especially if you plant them in a pioneer ecosystem, it's because they require all this kind of front end establishment to be done. And that's literally what's happening is these plants are helping to build and repair the ecosystem that will create the pathway for the next organisms to get their foot in, and it just keeps building and adding on. It's like almost like a relay race. So yeah, if all you've got is really nasty, gross weeds, you might have to you might be a few years to help push you through that. And I have worked with farmers in the past where they had really bad pastures, and they had to they managed goats for the first few years. And I'll tell you, those were some of the nicest pastures I'd ever seen after a few years of goats. Like, they were so nice, he had to get rid of the goats because there was no weeds for them left to eat. But they helped they were there to assist that ecosystem through it and get onto the stage which is more advanced. So the ecosystems want to evolve. They want to get more complex. And if you just figure out whatever is the weak link that's holding that ecosystem back, you can intervene, whether with animals, or there may be a case to use herbal sprays or compost teas, or molasses or things like that. I've heard of guys doing that, but that's pretty. I don't know. I've tried to do that stuff, and I find it too. It doesn't scale well versus the idea of like training animals to eat it. Take a quarter of your herd out, your best animals, train them to eat it, put them back in with the herd. They'll train the rest. That scales. Now you've got kind of a multi-level marketing scheme where the animals will keep recruiting more and more people to help solve that problem for you. Okay, I know that was a lot there. So if there's any follow-up questions while I pull up this next thing about water here.
It's exactly what I wanted to hear, Dakota. Just
Okay.
like more animals.
Yes. Yeah, I apologize to anyone in advance who has to buy more animals as a result of this. But it is like animals are your best farm workers. They're such good employees if they're managed properly, or they can just be unwelcome guests that just eat you out of house and home. But it really depends on your management. They want to work for you. Chickens want to scratch, pigs want to dig, goats would love nothing more than to eat all your thistles, or whatever woody shrubs you're dealing with. So figure out kind of what your ecosystem, where it's at, and then also you have to have an idea of where it wants to go. And so I'll share the screen again here. No matter where you are on the planet, there will be a clear pattern of which plants and animals will exist in each of these four phases: the establishment, the accumulation, the transitory, and the abundance phase. So this is your climax ecosystem, this is your pioneer ecosystem, and these two are in the middle. And so wherever you live in the world, identify what your climax is, and that's your target. So my farm is in the Aspen Parkland biome. You guys are kind of getting down into the foothills, maybe the boreal forest. Is that kind of where you guys are at?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like your ecosystem is going to be slightly different than me. Like you're a lot more wooded than I am, because you get more moisture and your growing season's a lot shorter. So your target is going to be different than mine. My ideal target is kind of grasslands interspersed with forests. Yours is probably mostly forests. If you were to do nothing, like if you walked away for 100 years and let this process take place without a human intervention. So you got to know where you are and where you're headed, and that'll give you a ton of clues for the management things that you can do to intervene to get the ecosystem to where you want it to be. And you don't necessarily have to, be at the climax. This is another key insight that's often missed about this conversation around succession, is that it's not a linear progress, it's a cycle. Ecosystems, and it's an upward cycle. So ecosystems once they're at a climax, they don't stay at a climax forever. There are organisms that exist in the environment that are there to kill this thing and bring it back to this stage and to let the cycle run again. Whether that's honey mushrooms, or it used to be mastodons, or some other fungus, or the pine beetle. That's what their job is in the ecosystem, is to tear this guy down, open things up again, get more sunlight in, to build the next layer of complexity, and so that the next time it evolves back into a climax, it's even higher than it was before. So this is a successional cycle. It's not a linear, we're going to hold it at this climax ecosystem forever. It won't work, and it'll be work to do that. But you think about how much work it takes, around the world to hold most of our agricultural land in this establishment phase. Almost all of our crops, our annual crops, wheat, corn, the small grains, the pulses, it's all there. And then the other ones are basically here, the pastures. We have very few crops apart from some orchard ones that are in this transitory or abundance phase, no matter where we are. So this is a really key principle to think about. And if folks don't have access to this, we've got a free download of this. It's like a 25-page resource on our website right now that folks can go get access to. It goes through the different principles for food forests, but it really can be used for any kind of plant ecosystem to help you guys out with that. Okay. So, we are 40 minutes in and we're like 2 questions down. This is okay. Where did that go? I'm trying to find that download. I just pulled it up. Here we go. So as I said, I want to share my screen again. I want to talk a bit about water. There's a question on YouTube Live about from Janelle about what kind of watering systems that we use for our animals. So this is another doc that we're working on. It's not available for download yet, but it will be shortly. So if folks want to get access to this, they can sign up to our newsletter. But this is all about the principles of grazing. And so here's a good image of what I mean by kind of multiple access to water points, and then putting a back fence up. So like, if they were at one point, they would have grazed here for say 1 to 4 days. And after that time window's up, they move to the next piece and you put a back fence up. But if you put a back fence up, they can't go back to get water where they were getting it before. So you got to have another water point. And if you keep doing that, that's the general principle of rotational grazing. So you want to, anywhere between moving them within 4 days, I would say is the minimum. And there's some guys that move 4 times a day or more. To me, that doesn't matter. I've never done that. The most we've ever moved is like maybe 2 or 3 times a day. And even that is only for like really specific things. Typically, we only move once a day with our beef herd and my dairy herd. And so what I'll do is like, I'll keep this back fence up and I'll actually have an image of this on for a design we just did for a client. This will help to illustrate this. So this is a 480 acre property that we did a design on. This is in my same ecosystem, the Aspen Parkland biome. Where is it here? There we go. So this one shows the days. There we go. So if they started here, they're in this paddock for day 1. The dotted lines are perimeter fence. These guys are temporary cross fences, which is like those electric reels. And I'll show an image of that later. But they're in here and they've got access to water right here. On day 2, you take this fence down and you move it ahead to the position for day 3. Now the cows can come access day 2, but they can also go back and access day 1. They don't as long as they've got enough on day 2. And you just keep doing that for 4 days. But the reason for the move on the 4th day, and normally you wouldn't move them like into another alleyway. You would this whole block here would actually be in front, but we've got it jogged over just to help illustrate. The reason for putting up what's called a back fence on day 4 or about day 4 is that by that time, in ideal growing conditions, the grass that was grazed on day 1 will start to regrow. And that's any animal's favorite thing to eat is new, fast growing grass. So that's why you want to put a back fence up to stop them from going back, because that's when plants get overgrazed. So overgrazing doesn't happen to pastures, it happens to individual plants. And it's purely a management problem. It has nothing to do with the cows. They're just doing what they do. But in order to achieve this, to put a back fence up, now you either need to have a new watering point, or you need to build some kind of a laneway that restricts the amount of stuff they can overgraze to kind of minimize damage. But ideally what you do is you just have a pipeline that runs along the whole length of whatever your permanent subdivision fencing is, so that you can break up in between there. And the other thing that's important with water is you want to have water points within 200 meters of any blade of grass on your property. That's the ideal. Now, if I come back to this, we've got these principles in here, but like I said, we haven't released this yet, but it'll be coming out soon. If you're on a newsletter, you'll get it. But there's a ton of research that's been done that shows that the ideal distance from water for optimum grazing is 200 meters. So animals, they tend to overgraze within 200 meters. They graze a little bit up to like 500 meters, and they basically don't graze at all beyond 1,000 meters. So you can literally on Google Earth Pro, you can literally draw like a radius of, say, find where your watering points are, and you can figure out how much land you're wasting right now by not having proper water. It's a really great exercise, and it's really quite shocking how much land the animals just aren't using, because they're lazy. They won't go that. And what's sad is they're underutilizing certain parts, and they're overutilizing or overgrazing other parts. This is a great little image here that shows, in an ideal situation, if you take a full plant, they take 50%, the roots don't stop growing with 50% of the plants removed. If you take 70% use, 50% of the roots stop growing for 17 days. So they kind of go into shock. They don't know what to do. And at 90% use, 90% of the plants is removed, or sorry, 100% of the roots stop growing for 14 days. This is that Kathy Voth. Sorry, I said Voss. It's Kathy Voth. She has some fantastic research she's done on pasture.com. Now, what's interesting here is that say you take 70 to 90% of your pastures, and then after 17 days, this plant starts to regrow. If the cows come back and they hit it within 17 days, it shuts down for even longer. So it depends on the type of plant. I know I said 4 days. Some plants are shorter, some are longer. Depends on the growing season. But in general, 4 days is a good number for that we found on our farm to optimize the amount of ground we're covering with this style of fencing before they get to the point where it's too far for them to walk back. Because if we didn't have a watering point here, like these alleyways are 200 meters, for example. So 200 meters wide. Once after this point, if they're grazing here in this corner, that's 200 meters to walk back to that water point. So if we move it to the next guy, even if this grass wasn't regrowing here, we're now outside of our optimum distance from water, and we're going to start getting underutilization here and overutilization in other areas. And so the cows are lazy. Rather than walk an extra 100 meters, they'll just take the plants that are closer down past 50%. So in order to achieve this optimal that will help break your pest cycles and maximize your pasture utilization, you have to have some kind of a pipeline system, like I've shown here, that allows you to have multiple watering points built into that. And so now I'm going to show you an image of what that looks like on our farm. It's real simple. It's a certain diameter of pipe. That diameter will depend on the size of your herd and what other functions you want it to do, whether it's for irrigation or fire protection or filling ponds. And then just a simple cam lock fitting. So I like to use all metal fittings if possible. Obviously the valves are, I wouldn't want to buy a 1.5 inch brass valve. These PVC ones are fine, but as much else is metal as possible, because I find it's more durable. So a T with a barb on it, ball fitting, and then a cam lock, from on both ends. And what's nice about this is when I go to move this tank, it takes me a second to throw those cam locks out, tip the tank over, throw this in the back of a side by side, and move to the next point. And so this is how you get really good grazing. And this is a map of our farm here. Actually, let me go to I've got a bigger version of it here. This is Cohen Farm here. And this shows how many watering taps we have on our farm. So there's not this field here is a bit weird and we haven't run one down yet. But this is the worst field that we've got. But it's still probably mostly within 200 meters. But almost everywhere else in our farm, we have a water tap within 200 meters of every blade of grass on our farm. And that helps us to really optimize our rotational grazing. Which in turn helps us to break parasite cycles and all this other stuff.
What does this look like in the winter? How do you,
Yeah. So great question. So in our context, we have the light blue lines here are summertime or above ground water lines. And then we have winter watering points. So this guy here is a wintering watering point. This guy here, and then we've got some in our corrals. And with those winter watering points, every blade of grass is still within a kilometer. In the wintertime, they're not doing much grazing anymore, so it's mostly bale grazing. So they can walk a bit further. It's not as hot, and other things are shifting. But that being said, if possible, like on this particular design that we did for some clients, we actually were able to design a system that by keeping water flowing through these lines, if you have enough water or if you have a spring, you can actually keep above ground lines open all winter just by allowing water to flow through them. It's like a spring system that you would see in the mountains or something like that. Like I was just talking to a friend of mine this morning, they got a spring on their property. The spring stayed active even in -50. Water won't freeze. So this is an ideal situation. This is very unique and it requires a lot of water flowing, or stored that you can pump. But those are some different strategies. So I think I have, where is it in this resource doc that we'll be sharing eventually. I have some kind of the two winter watering systems that I have the most experience with. They're both energy-free livestock watering systems. One of them is called the water post. The other one's called a Kobe waterer. So they're both energy-free. They have different contexts for when you would use one versus the other. The one's about $2,000 all in. So there's no pads. There's no, it's like $2,000 for the system. And other than digging it, that's the only install cost. And these drinking posts or water posts rather are about, actually no, that they are called drinking posts. They only cost about $1,000, and this is the same idea as a frost-free hydrant. It's just that the animals operate the hydrant with their nose, and you can get these for pigs, cows, horses, buffalo, whatever you want. This is another example. This is an image of like a spring flow-through system that you would have where, water comes in, fills one tank, overflows into a pipe, goes on to the next one, fills that one. So in this system, you can create a cascading series of water tanks. So the same water is being used to keep all these tanks open. So you're not wasting it. It's not like you have to dump it out into the pasture. That's one strategy to do it there. Oh, shoot. Sorry, I just see that. Are you guys not seeing the docs as I'm sharing them?
No, we're seeing.
We're
Seeing the one document, the one that you haven't got to release yet, but when you clicked over to try and show, I think the farm that you had recently worked on, yeah, that one never came up.
Oh, sorry about that. Oh, so the one we're working, this guy.
Yeah, that one never came up.
Sorry about that, guys. So you didn't see the details of like the grazing system?
Not quite. I think we were mistakenly looking at the sort of diagram.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, if that happens again, please let me know. I don't know why it didn't come through. I'll share it here now just so you can see it for context. I won't go through it all again, but this is the system for
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So you weren't seeing that.
No.
Okay. Sorry, yeah, my team was even texting me there. My apologies, folks. Okay. So there's another question about from YouTube Live that's relevant to just I'll make a quick comment on it from Travis. He's saying when buying land, how much do you have to worry about pesticides, herbicides, GMOs being used on neighboring land or even on the land that you're at? I don't worry about it too much. I think the power of our ecosystems to regenerate and to remediate these things is pretty powerful. That's one thing. And the second thing is there's nowhere on earth that you can go that isn't contaminated. So yeah, in my mind, obviously you wouldn't want to buy like an old nuclear waste site or something like that. But even those, there's like Chernobyl, there's a fantastic video called The Wolves of Chernobyl, which just shows the power of ecosystems to even repair that level of supposed toxicity and to remediate it. So yeah, I'm not worried about it. Okay, you go on to you guys' next question here. You had, what organic fertilizer other than cow manure do you use on your hay crops? So up until this past year, we've never used any fertilizer apart from cattle manure or like compost that we made on site. And however, there's a guy at a sundry, which is near you guys. His name's Lee Martineau. He's got a company called Terra Preta Pellets that he's making basically certified organic garden, crop, orchard pellets with biochar, basically all the good stuff, everything you can imagine, rock phosphate, fish meal, and they're phenomenal. I've done some, so I used it in my my food forest dock here. Are you guys seeing the screen here? So yeah, I used it last year, both on our pastures, in my garden, and in a food forest planting that I did at my new property. And I was just blown away by how fast they were able to turn. Like this was, basically compacted lawn for 50 years. And it turned it into some of the nicest soil I've ever seen just in the same growing season, just by adding these pellets in. Now, I had to put a lot in, like 20,000 pounds per acre, but I was only doing it on a 4-foot row. So 4-foot row, 50 feet long, which is like 2 5-gallon buckets. So it's nothing. But to try to scale that up, the amendments are really expensive because most of these fertilizers are organic fertilizers, like $1 to $2 a pound. So you're looking at $20,000 a pound to get a really meaningful amount. That being said, we did do some trials with putting about like 50 pounds per acre of these pellets in on pasture, cropland, and a few others. And I think it's worth it especially in the early years, but it's expensive. You're looking at 50 to $100 an acre, and that's just like a few pellets per square foot. So it's I don't have the personal experience to say if that will make a big difference, but I can say that the bale grazing, the composting that we've done, the spreading manure, stuff like that, we've taken one of our worst hay fields, and in a single year with just proper grazing management and applying like a decent amount of compost from our winter feeding operations, we've turned it into our best field. Like what was it? It would have been, it more than doubled the yield in like a single year. So you can do it. And that's our strategy on our farm, which I'm going to say you can still see this here, is every year we produce between like so I have my dairy cows and my 30 pigs in kind of this integrated livestock system here. And then our beef cattle are in a separate system, which for the most part, they're out bale grazing out in the fields. But when it's really nasty, they come back to the corrals. But between those two systems, we produce enough manure to spread on about 20 to 40 acres every year. Which isn't surprising considering that, we use about 100 bales per acre per year, 100 to, well, probably 150 actually this year, like round bales. And so if you think about that, if you were to, break that up into bales per acre, it's a lot of bales per acre that we're just putting back on to the land. So what I found to be most effective is we bring in manure spreaders. And so like it would cost me $1 per pound per acre to apply these fertilizer pellets. And versus if I put, say, $50 an acre into spreading manure, I can cover 40 acres at like thousands of pounds per acre of compost with these manure spreaders. So we actually bring corral cleaners in, professional corral cleaners. They're $500 an hour for like 2 trucks and a loader, but it's worth it. And they give a really good coverage. And so every year we pick our worst field, and most of our fields are around, 10 to 20 acres. And we just do that one field and we just bomb it, getting it really thick. And then the next year we go to the next worst. And we've been doing this for a few years now. And every year we're seeing stuff get better and better and better. We used to haul our own, do our own spreading, but it doesn't make sense. Like you can't afford to own the equipment to spread for how good and how fast these guys are. Like you need to have 2 tractors. One of them's a loader tractor, and 2 operators for like a week to do what they can do in 4 hours. And these guys can drive at 80 kilometers an hour if you got a good farm road. So even our furthest pasture out here, they can get out there in like a couple minutes versus me in a tractor, which can maybe go 20 miles an hour. It's a 20-minute, 30-minute round trip just to go out and back. So that's what I would recommend, is find a local corral cleaner, get on their list. And especially if you got a hub, and like even in a small system, if you're using enough bedding, like with my 5 or 6 dairy cows, and right now I only have my 5 sows in the system, we're using 1,000 pounds of straw a week. So you don't need a ton of animals to produce really good compost. And a lot of it. And this one system will produce enough for probably 10 to 20 acres every year, just in my integrated livestock system, which I've got tons of videos on my YouTube channel. And I go into how I used to make compost. I used to flip it and do all that stuff. I don't do any of that crap anymore. I put down lots of straw, I deep mulch, and the animals, ideally the chickens and the pigs, are out there stirring it up so it's all nice and even. And in the spring, my corral cleaners come in, they load directly from the pen into their trucks. I'm not flipping it 6 times, doing any of that stuff. I'm actually at the point now where I see no benefit in doing all the composting stuff that everybody else does. I think it's not a good return of energy on investment. And I know that's really controversial at this day and age, but I'll just say that I've got Gabe Brown to back me up on this. He's never used compost at all on any of his land for 20 years. And he's, in my opinion, one of the best regenerative farmers in the world. So in a small setting, maybe compost makes sense for market gardens or annual gardens to get a really nice seed bed. But if you're applying it on your fields, I would rather just have really good manure that has the right amount of carbon in it so that it's not off-gassing. So I'll give you another metric here is if you can smell it and it doesn't smell good, you're losing fertility to the atmosphere. That ammonia that when you go into your chicken coop or when you're loading your corrals and it smells just like it's going to burn your nose out, that's ammonia and that's nitrogen. So if you don't put enough carbon down, you are literally like letting money just off gas into the air in value. And it's expensive. Like to buy that nitrogen back is, you know, dollars a pound. So a cow produces, you know, 30 to 50 pounds of high quality compost every day. So they're producing 30 to $50 worth of value a day. If you were to buy that as organic fertilizer pellets. And a pig is probably, you know, 10 pounds, a full grown pig a day that they're producing. A chicken would be a third of a pound. So that's the real strategy. And I missed it for years. I never put down enough bedding. And now that I've gotten through that, it's use your nose as a guide, put down lots, whether it's wood chips or straw or old hay, or you can use biochar if you got enough of it, but something to soak up that nitrogen, bind it, and then from there, get it on your fields or wherever it's going to be as quickly as possible.
So you don't recommend piling it? You recommend getting it on the fields as soon as possible?
In my mind, that's the most cost effective, and I would say the most like it's the most efficient and the most effective, because it's very difficult to make high quality compost. It's very difficult. Like you it's a full-time job if you're going to make good compost. And it's really easy to make bad compost to the point where it's actually almost a detriment to put it onto your cropland or your pastures. And it's super labor intensive versus what I found is, like, in my mind, if a cow takes a crap on a field and that's good for the field, like, why go through the extra steps of doing all the composting? Yes, the one argument is it's less bulky, so it's more efficient to haul. But if you're getting these corral cleaners in and you're not hauling it yourself, that goes out the window, because, for them to take one extra trip is 15 minutes worth of work. And so the only downside to that is sometimes it can burn the crops. But if you're using enough carbon, it's not an issue. And then for our annual gardens, we apply it in the fall. So we don't apply raw bedding in the springtime. We do it in the fall, and then it has all winter to break down. So we're using time to achieve some of these goals. But for our pasture and our cropland, we put it right out on the fields. And it doesn't stink. Like, if you have enough bedding that or some kind of carbon source that you're putting down, it's just as good as compost. Yeah.
You're not concerned about putting sort of raw compost like that onto like food gardens?
Not if you put it on the fall.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's only for like our annual gardens. And we do still make like a little bit, but really my mom only uses it for like her potting plants and stuff. Like we make a tiny little bit every year that we just kind of flip a few times. But for the most part, even our chicken manure, like when we clean our chicken coop out in the wintertime, it goes directly onto the garden in the winter. So all winter we kind of like almost like kind of bale graze around our annual garden, where you can see where you've gone, and you just create a layer, and it just sits there all winter. It rots in the spring. We then till it in, and it's, in my opinion, way faster. And we haven't had any issues. We've been doing that for quite a few years now. And for fruit trees, I would just put it right at the base of them. There's no contamination issues there. I mean, if you're selling this as a commercial grower, they would tell you that you're going to kill somebody, but I'm not worried about it. Yeah. And so, yeah, we had a question there in the YouTube chat about, manure bedding on our gardens. And yeah, Travis, that's what we do there, is we just put it on in the fall. Okay. I think that talks about how do I compost. I don't. There's one of my favorite farmers. He passed away a few years ago. His name was Neil Dennis. He was a rotational grazer from Saskatchewan. And I think he was one of the first guys in the world to get to like 1 million pounds per acre stock density for rotational grazing. The guy was just a mad scientist, but he had a quote that I loved. And he said, if you're going to be lazy, you might as well be good at it. And so that's kind of my motto is just really be lazy and efficient with this farming stuff. Okay, there's a really good question from the chat here from YouTube that I want to go over because we've touched on this already, but I can quickly summarize it. So from Joshua, he's asking, all the interest and benefits of rotational grazing, or with all the interest and benefits of rotational grazing, what are the major obstacles that limit farms, homesteads, from implementing good rotational grazing systems? I would say for me, and for my clients, it was a lack of understanding of what are the key principles for like how to lay out the fencing and stuff. And this is why my team and I are putting together these documents is once you understand like, okay, maximum distance for fences is 200 meters for your permanent fences at a maximum. For most people, it's actually probably 100 meters or less. And once you get that, and then there's like a water line within every 200 meters, and a few of these other things, like they just design themselves. There's only one way you can do it. So that for me is, I think the biggest obstacle is understanding where to put the fences and why, and where to put the water and why. And once you've got that, and then the last piece I would say is a lack of good tools. And so this is where I'm going to open up another doc that we're building right now. Here. And I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you guys can see this. Can you see this here? So this is another key principles doc of just the different fencing types. And most people are pretty familiar with, the different permanent fencing. But when it comes to temporary fencing, this is where I struggled the most, is getting really good material. And there's different guys that have different opinions on this. I'm of the mind that I'd rather buy it once, or what's the saying? It's the bitterness of poor quality remains long after the cheapness of of the sweetness of cheap price remains. And so I'd rather go for really good quality stuff. I love Gallagher materials. Their geared reels are the highest in the industry. You can get cheaper reels for sure, but they're cheaper. Same with their fence posts, really good like multi-wire Gallagher, the ring tops. There's a special place in hell for the person who designed those pigtail fence posts. And any of the plastic step-ins that you can buy at PV Mart, they're absolute garbage. They're single-use fence posts. And if you don't believe me, go into PV Mart and try to flex one like by half an inch. It'll snap in your hands in the store. That's without any UV, radiation or whatever. So get really good quality fencing materials, so that it's really efficient for you to, like, you should be able to put an electric fence up as fast as you can walk if you've got the right systems. And I can do it. And I can put I've got another reason why the 200-meter fences is that these reels come in 400-meter lengths, is like the standard size that they come in. So as long as everything's within 200 meters, you'll never run out of, you'll never need two reels. Like if you're doing with multiple species, Gallagher makes a beautiful, it's called a multi-wire step-in post, or if you just got cattle, their Gallagher single strand, their orange step-in posts are really great. And there's a few other things that will be thrown out here, but for the most part, these are the only tools, the main tools that I use is these good reels and a really good fencer. That's another good one. I like Stay Fix or Speed Right. They're the same brand, just different stickers on it. Basically, they're fantastic. Being able to turn the fence off anywhere on the property is really nice with the remotes. So those would be my main considerations for setting up a good rotational system, is really good design, understanding the principles, and then don't cheap out on materials. Buy it once, have it last a lifetime, and then your day-to-day stuff is just a breeze. Gates is also another big one that we've struggled with. So having like equipment, like something like this, where you can drive over fences with your quad or material. I don't really like these drive-through steel gates. There may be a context where they're useful, but for the most part, these gates on springs like this You can just drive through with any piece of equipment. That makes it really, really awesome. And yeah. Okay. One of your next questions here. How many pounds of grain do you feed your dairy cows? So for me, the grain is a management tool for my dairy cows. We don't feed any grain to our beef cows. They're 100% grass fed and finished. Our dairy cows get, like one of those, I think it's like a half-gallon scoop. They'll get one of those once a day. I don't know how many pounds that is. It's maybe 2 or 3 pounds. Versus the dairy guys, they're feeding, I think it's like 9 to 12 pounds of grain per day per cow. So it's a third or a quarter to what they are. And the only reason I use it is just because I have the pig feed anyways. I just use my pig feed or my chicken feed that we make and sell. It works great for as a treat for them. And it's just nice, throw it in the stall so they walk right into the stanchion. Same thing with their calves. I use that to train the calves to get in so they want to be locked up at night. So it's just really just enough that they don't feel gypped when they get their treat. So it's not a supplement for them. And we still get good yields of our milk. Like I had my new cow, Mary just calved the other day, and she's producing 4 gallons. She's a heifer and she's producing 4 gallons a day in one milking, and still enough for her calf. And that's pretty typical. Most of my cows start out with about 4 gallons per milking per day. I just do once a day. And then after about 6 months, they're about 2 gallons a day. And then I usually just let the calf take the rest. And then I switch over and start milking my new ones. I run a 6-month milking rotation with my cows.
Do you let them kind of have something else to kind of distract them after they're done their grain, depending on the cow's temperament?
No. And I'm going to share another doc because I think I figured out we call it the God code for kind of a milking system. And I'm actually gonna have to download this one because it's to be able to see it here. So I used to do that, and I used to struggle with, the cows not standing still and stepping around and kicking and all this stuff. But what I started to realize is, your animals communicate. They don't speak English, but they do communicate with you. And when they're stamping around and kicking and they're saying, I don't like this, do something about it. And so yes, there can be some cows who are more patient, or the same system wouldn't bother them as much. But what I found is after years and years of just tweaking whatever system I'm using to make sure that they're just really happy, what I've landed on is this design. And I'll show the layout of it first, then I'll show an actual image of it here in a second. So there's 2 or several key principles you need to think about when you're designing your milking shed. The first is, while the cows are being milked, they need to be able to touch noses with their calves. And ideally the calves can actually eat out of the same trough. And what they'll do is they'll stand right here, and maybe they'll snack on some of the grain that mom's eating, but for the most part, when the mom's done, she just sits there and just licks the calf because she thinks she's getting milked by the calf. And so this is a 12 by 24 shed. Like I use the steel frame ones, divided in half. So 12 by 12 pen on this side. This is where I lock the calves up at night. And in the morning, the calves get let in here. They go into their stanchion. There's a bit of grain waiting for them. Their calves come and eat the grain with mom, get licked, and I milk them out in here. The other key principle is that during the night, while the mothers are out either grazing or eating hay, they also need to be able to come and touch noses with their calves. you know, there's few things that freak a cow out more than not being able to know where their baby is at all times. And this is actually interesting. This is the true cause of mastitis. Mastitis is not a bacterial infection caused by unsanitary conditions. It is a separation conflict from the cows not being able to see their babies. And I've told the story other places, so I won't go into it here. But we used to have mastitis issues on our farm, and when I redesigned my milking system so that those two things were met, so that while they were being milked, they could touch their calves, or at least, well, even if they can see them but they can't touch them, it's not good enough. They need to be able to reach over and touch noses with their calf, skin to skin. And same thing at night. And when I changed those two things, we have not had mastitis on our farm since, and we've changed nothing else. So that's what I would say is whatever your system is, the cows are not enjoying it. And I'm gonna show an actual video of, because we just updated our system the other day. Because I've done a bunch of tweaks on it. Come on. Okay, here we go. So yeah, this is the system that I built. And now I broke my rule for this one because she has a this is Mary. She just calved a few days ago and it was -40 out. So we kept her calf in a heated building just a few steps away. She was calm enough that I didn't need to have her calf out. But for the most part, my cows are where is it here? This is what it looks like. You know, when they're getting milked. And we milk like this. And when it was -50, we were milking outside like this. This is an open air barn. There's a few tricks to get these surge milkers working, but that's the secret. Versus the way I used to milk. By the way, you could see that video, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The way I used to milk was this, which wasn't even a shed at all, but her calf was nowhere in sight. It was actually like 100 feet away, locked up in another pen. So she could still touch noses at night, but she couldn't touch noses while she's being milked. And I fought with this every day for years. And as soon as I made that shift, the cows love getting milked. And the calves love running into their pen at night. So it's the same routine at nighttime. So at night, I open this gate. I put some grain in the feeders. The mothers come in, they go in their stanchions. I lock the stanchions. Usually the calves follow their mothers right in. I open this gate. I lock this one so they can't run out. And I push them into this guy, close this one, open the stanchions, kick them back out. And it's just, it takes a minute to do this at night. Now, when everybody's trained, when there's a new calf and they're learning the ropes, it's a bit, takes a few minutes longer, but within a week they're trained up, and I just literally open a gate and call them and they run in.
What do you feed your dairy cows? You don't feed a lot of grain, so what do you feed them? A special blend of hay?
Just good quality hay, like first or second cut hay. We make most of our own hay on farm. I did buy some organic second cut this year, but for the most part, it's just first cut hay. I don't do silage. I don't do protein supplements. I don't do anything else.
When you sell your calves, how old?
We don't sell the calves. We do I do a 6-month rotation where so like I'm milking I'm milking the mother, locking the calf up at night for 6 months. After 6 months, they're not really producing much, so I just let the calf have it for another 3 months, and then at 9 months I wean the calf, and typically the calf just goes in with the beef herd because I've got that. If I didn't have that system, I would harvest the calf at 9 months to save myself the complexity of separate breeding pens and stuff like that. And that would be I would have kind of a veal type operation would be ideal for me. Or I'd have a separate pen right next to them that I could kick them into where they could still have fence line weaning. And then so all of our dairy cows, if they're not heifers, they go back into our, if they're heifers, they stay in our milking regime, and they get trained up for that. And if they're males, they go into our beef program. And we sell all of our meat as grass-fed and finished meat off the farm. They're harvested on farm. So we don't, we haven't taken an animal to an auction in 40 years. Before I was even born. Everything's born on the farm and gets harvested on the farm now. Okay. So question about livestock guardian dogs. We don't really have any. I find with my integrated livestock system, and I've talked about this in videos on my YouTube channel, we just don't have predators. That may be because of just where we are. So I can't really speak to that. If I was going to get livestock guardian dogs, or animals, I would go with more donkeys or alpacas or geese rather than dogs, because of the expense of feeding a dog and the complexity of them running and turning into a predator himself. Of all the research that I've seen, like there's other animals that are better suited for dogs, or sorry, for livestock guardian animals. So like for chickens, it would be getting some Egyptian geese, or for sheep, it would be a donkey or an alpaca. I would try to go for that rather than getting a dog. You guys also asked the question about the homeschool group. Absolutely, we do tours all the time. You can book them on our website, cohenfarm.ca. Any time of year you want, there's always something cool you can see. We can do anywhere from one person to 100. We charge $1,000 per day for the tour, or we do a free tour, sorry, a $10 tour in the summer, usually around September, that 100 people come to. Okay. I'm gonna get rid of some YouTube live chats here. We got one from Minthia. She says, what's the best way to build new garden beds out of heavy compacted soil that is full of rocks and the area is too large to put cardboard down and dump fresh dirt on top of? Thanks. So I actually have a YouTube video on my channel where I go in depth into this, or I've got several on my gardening process. It would be cover crops, adding livestock bedding or manure, or if you have it, compost if you are going to make it. But most importantly is cover crops, lots and lots of cover crops. And there's ways you can do cover cropping while you're growing a garden that I go through in my videos. There's quite a few. I've got some soil health testing ones on my channel, as well as I think they're called like a cover crop to help your garden grow. I've got 2 or 3 on that, so you could check that out. But and if it's rocks, hand pick the rocks out. If it's compacted, I have nothing against tillage. We till our gardens once a year, every year. I have zero problem using tillage. No-till gardening doesn't make. I see no benefit to it unless you're. I mean, Richard Perkins, who's from Sweden, has a really great no-till garden system, but he uses, I think it's like 4 tons of mulch every few years for a 30-foot bed. And he probably uses like a half ton of, I can't remember the exact, it's a lot. It takes a lot of mulch and a lot of compost to keep those systems going. And so you can basically either till or you can make compost, but you're tilling either way, because to make compost, you got to till. So I'd rather just till once a year. Most of that equipment's readily available. Rototillers are cheap. But if you're tilling to kill weeds, you're banging your head against the wall. When you till to kill weeds, you're just planting more weeds. So I till to create a seed bed or to terminate a cover crop. And I go through a lot of that in my YouTube videos. And I'd also say there was a question that you guys had about the Homestead group about the cover crops. I've got a lot of videos on my YouTube channel where I go through some of that. There's some fantastic cover crops you can buy right now. Covers & Co. is one based out of Alberta, I think, that sells a couple different good blends. There's Union Forage I bought from them. There's some really good cover crop suppliers. And it really depends on what your goals are. to design a blend, because there's nitrogen blends, there's biomass blends, there's blends that help to break pest cycles, because certain plants harbor organisms that kill other pests. So it really depends on what your goals are. But again, just doing some research, figure out what your weak link is in your ecosystem, and design a cover crop blend for that. And the other thing I would stress, and you'll find this in the our food forest doc, which you can get on our website, is you want to think about, when you're designing a cover crop, you want to think about, just like a food forest, there's different layers of the food forest. There's low, there's medium, there's high, and there's emergent. Same thing in a cover crop or in an annual gardens. And the other principle I think about is life cycle. So there can be annuals, biennials, short-lived perennials, and so on. So when you are planting a cover crop, think about the different layers. Have low ground covers like clovers, have medium guys that are like the vines, have some high guys like oats and radishes, and then have emergence like sunflowers, and you might have hemp is one I did last year. And if you can get all those different layers in, and also think about cover crops in terms of the families that they come in. So there's two broad families. There's broadleafs and grasses. And then within those two families, there's further subdivisions, which is warm season and cool season plants. And there's nitrogen fixers and non-nitrogen fixers. And so if you think about that diversity, because if you have a diversity of wheat, barley, oats, those are all cool season grasses. You don't have a lot of diversity there. It's the same main form in that ecosystem. What you want to get is, maybe wheat, barley, oats, but also something like a broadleafs, other grasses, warm seasons, cool seasons, nitrogen fixers that are in different layers of low, medium, high, emergent. And ideally, if you can, try to also plant in multiple crops for one at the same time. So one of the things that we do in our grain cropping, or if we're doing grain cropping, or if we're breaking up a pasture and reseeding it, is I'll plant annuals, biennials, short-lived perennials, and long-lived perennials all at the exact same time in the same seeder, in the same pass. And that way I've basically planted, 10 to 20 years worth of crops in one go, and they function with proper management. Just you mow or grazing at the right time, and they'll pass so that, you have your grains first, then that passes way into maybe next year you've got some red clover and some vetch and other biennials, and then that goes into shorter term grasses and legumes, and then eventually to whatever your kind of climax pasture crop's going to be. So some things to think about, if that makes sense in your context. Okay. So we've got a question for pigs from Katarina. How many acres do you recommend for free range pigs, and how much feed do you give them per day? So it really depends on what kind of forage you're grazing them in. I'll give you an example for our farm here. So I'll share my screen again. So we do my dairy cows and I have typically around 4 to 6 dairy cows and 30 pigs at max, 30 to 40 pigs. And the only spots they graze on the farm are this 7-acre field and this 18-acre field. Oh, see, and a 3-acre field here. So now that's a lot, but these are our worst pastures because they were the closest to our hub for years, and so they're the most overgrazed. That's a lot of, that's almost an acre per animal. You don't need that for sure if you've got really good pastures. So it depends on a lot of things. It depends on the health of your pastures, how much moisture you're getting, because that determines your rotation. But even in this system, in our context in Alberta, which is about 12 inches of rain per year, we are able to graze 3 to 4 rotations during the summertime. So we're pretty tight rotations, but that's giving, we're not grazing very hard. However, when we're all done, like my plan is it's going to be like 10 acres, 10 to 15 acres. Well, I should say that this piece is not part of our grazing system. This is our swath grazing here. This is an old design. So it really is only about 20 acres that we use. So the short answer is it depends. The long answer is it depends on your climate, your soil type, your pastures. But think about it in terms of when you're figuring out your stocking capacity, you have to stock to, and I'm gonna go, can you guys see this this again here? Can you guys see my screen here?
Yeah.
What you if you want to regenerate land, a good principle is you want to graze a third, trample a third, and leave a third as a good principle. And so if you don't have much to begin with, your stocking rates in order to regenerate pastures may be very low for a long time. However, once you get good systems, like every holistic management person that I've ever trained under has said the same thing, which is in about 5 to 10 years, we quadrupled our carrying capacity from where we were at the start. So that's why it's really hard for me to give a number of like, this is how much you want to do, but I can give you the principles. And so stock your land to whatever rate that allows you to graze a third, leave a third, trample a third. Because if you can hit those goals and you're not coming back, before 30 to 60 days typically, so that your plants can recover and you can get a good grazing the second time. And here's a good image of what that, third grazed, the third left, third trampled. If you can hit that, even when your pastures are poor, you'll still be regenerating them and it'll keep getting better and better every year. I can say that this pasture here, this 3.1 acre piece here, this used to be a horse pasture. This was 3 acres of golf green. Like you could putt it, the whole thing. It was awful. And it's now probably the best pasture on our farm. And that took about 5 years of just really good management. And now we graze this field 3 to 4 times per year with our 4 cows and 30 pigs. So it's a big moving target for grazing, but the land will tell you and the animals will tell you if you hit those targets. Now, you also asked the question, and you can see this again, right?
Yeah.
We've got we have a pig's dock that we're working on as well. And the principle here is it's called limit feeding. And so you can do the math, which is, pigs eat 3 to 4% of their body mass per day, or you can do something called limit feeding. And I can't find where it is on this page, but what you do is you feed them as much as they will eat twice a day. So no matter what size pig you have, whether it's a baby pig like these guys that's just starting to eat feed or a full-grown sow, if you always make sure that for twice a day, they get as much food as they can walk and they're starting to walk away, and you do that twice a day, you'll be at their optimum. One of the biggest mistakes I see that folks make with their animals is they try to ration. So it's not limit feeding, it's rationing the grain. And then it just takes your animals longer to grow. So whether you're trying to raise a meat bird or a pig or a cow, like it's the same math. Like they need a certain amount of feed to get them to a certain size. You can do that in a short period of time, or you can drag it out over 2 years, like people are doing with a lot of these other breeds that they say can be, like the Kunis and stuff that are supposedly can be a grazing pig. It doesn't work. I can hit a 250-pound pig in 5 to 6 months, feeding them twice a day. And it's fantastic meat and there's no health issues. Or you can take that same pig and you can try to ration him and only give him what you think he needs a day for 2 years and still get a 250-pound pig. But you might lose half because I guarantee you pigs aren't going to wait politely while their one next to them finishes his plate. They're all going to eat as fast as they can. And so you got to feed as much as the smallest pig will eat twice a day. Because at a certain point, the guys that are eating faster and are bigger and stronger, they'll get full, they'll walk away. And you got to make sure that the stragglers are getting as much as they need still. Now, for my sows, I tweaked the rule a little bit. When they're not breeding, like when they're gestating, I only feed them once a day because they've already caught, they're already pregnant, and they typically giving them that much food, they've put on a lot of weight and they don't need it. But when they're nursing, I still feed them twice a day. That same rule. So it's a really great hack, and typically it takes about 15 minutes. I've heard it said is like as much as they'll eat in 15 minutes. I don't time it. I just go based on their appetites. And when they're growing like this, it'll change every few days. So you really got to keep an eye on it. And these troughs are my preferred feeding system, which is just a 2x12, 2x4, and then some kind of canvas or matting that pops through a fence so you can drop buckets down the side is really nice.
How do you prevent your pigs from like rooting up your corrals there? Or like even when you're grazing them, at what point you need to move them before they start rooting up your pasture?
Yeah, so good question. I started to move my pigs with my dairy cows a couple years ago, and it's been a game changer. So I don't know if I have any. I've got some videos that shows them, but this picture, this top wire is for the dairy cows, this bottom wire is for the pigs, and I get very little rooting. And I don't know if it's my soil type or just the management, but there's a few thoughts I'll share on that. One is pigs don't like to be contained. So most of the rooting happens along the fence line. And so what I found is that they're really only rooting because they want to get out. They're pretty smart and very strong-willed. They don't like the idea of being penned in. So if you want to, this is another thing I'll say, is if you want to encourage them to root, restrict their area. Give them a small area that they can kind of see the fence on all sides of them, and they'll try to go down to get out of it. But when I'm giving them like, multi-acre paddocks at a time, I get very little rooting unless we get a lot of rainfall, and then it's only in certain areas. And it's quite minimal, especially for the breed that I've got. Like these guys can dig a 4-foot hole in an afternoon, no problem. And they do in the corral. But the other thing I think makes a difference is because they are, or another thought, because I'm limit feeding them, I think they spend less time wasting energy digging holes and more time actually grazing because they're getting their third meal of the day by themselves. That might be another factor. Another factor is the fact that because I have my dairy cows with my pigs, they don't need a wallow. They'll just go use the cow pies. So they roll in the fresh cow pies, and that's how they cool off. And because because they've always got those little mud piles everywhere, they kind of are able to achieve that need to get mucky and dig around just in those piles, which also solves pest problems and spreads the manure out and means I don't have to have a wallow. So those are some thoughts there about my system. I know it can be the bane of people's existence, but I don't have an issue. And so I graze my pastures with my pigs and my dairy cows together. I follow the same principles I've talked about tonight, and I give them lots of space, and I move them typically every 4 days. Just like I talked about earlier with a new watering point.
Have you ever tried using them as a rototiller in your garden, Dakota?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I have videos where there's a video on my YouTube channel called Gardening with Livestock, where I go through a whole case study of it's about a half-acre garden that I used to grow right behind my livestock hub. And it's fantastic. It took from like pure quackgrass to the best garden soil I've ever had in 1 year. And then continually rotating them in the fall to help break up the crop residues as like a cycle with the chickens. So I would bring my chickens and my pigs in kind of in pigs would come in first and then the chickens afterwards. And it was a really nice rotation. Yeah. Okay, we've got a question from Tippy Acres. I'm gathering pigs for the first time this spring. I'm sorting out, I see all sorts of warning online about not feeding them meat or anything else that has even touched meat. Since they're omnivores, that's the basis. What's the basis for their fear? I'd like to toss them old layers on occasion. I understand not feeding pig to pig. Yeah, that's my approach. I never feed pigs to pigs or chickens to chickens, but I'll feed the two to each other all the time. When we butcher chickens, it all goes in the pig pen. I feed my pigs gophers, fresh gopher. The big thing is fresh meat. I have had occasions where they've been given meat that wasn't fresh and it was rotten and they got food poisoning. So that, you got to be careful about that. But like when I butcher our cows, that can go in the pig pens. They love it. It's fantastic. And yes, they are omnivores. Same thing with the chickens. The basis for the warning, I believe, comes from trichinosis, but that's just pig to pig, I think. But as long as you're cooking your meat properly, it's that trichinosis isn't an issue either. And again, the parasites, like that's more of an environmental thing. If they're not managed properly, I'll go back to this pig screen here. One of the big game changers that I had for my pigs is not only these troughs, but matting. So let me download this so it's a little bigger. I can zoom in there. So for folks that are in Alberta or in anywhere there's an oil and gas industry, you're in luck because you can get this matting for dirt cheap. There's a place in Ponoka that just started up. They'll sell this incredible matting for $1 a square foot. Concrete's like $10 a square foot. You can't afford not to use this. It's fantastic. It's heavy as hell. I think it weighs about 10 or 15 pounds per square foot. So I cut mine into 24-foot lengths. They're 8 feet wide, inch and a half thick with like steel cable in the middle. So even a pig can't wreck that. But by having these mats next to where the troughs are, there's no mud. And because when a pig eats, like they're stepping in mud, putting it in their plate, and that's where a lot of the parasite and just feed waste comes from. So by having this little bit of a buffer, this doesn't turn into a mud hole. And I've used this for years now. I used to not have it, and I would never go back. So yeah, in terms of breaking parasite cycles, that's another big thing for pigs. And also, again, having the chickens in there like this, their chickens have literally microscopes for eyes. They can see things that we can't. And so they'll go and find any of these parasites and they turn them into eggs for us.
Just a quick question, when you're harvesting your animals, like the pigs and the cows, because you do it all on farm, what do you do with the waste? Like I know you harvest organs, but the intestines and the head and whatnot, have you found, what do you do with them?
Yeah, so I have composted it in the past. And what I found is it's basically a bait trap or a bait for coyotes. Because we harvest in the fall or sorry, in the winter, it's cold enough that it's really difficult to get a good compost going. So the simple system, and it's not ideal. Like ideally I would get so for some of the beef or intestines and stuff that the chickens and the pigs can physically get at, I'll just put that in the pen and the chickens and pigs will eat it all and it's like gone. The bones and like the skull and the hide, they can't eat that. And so I just take that out to the highest hill that's the furthest away and let gravity and coyotes do the work for us. And that's how I get the fertility back on the land. And that's been our strategy. I have successfully composted an entire cow once that died. So you can do it and it worked quite well. Like bones were like there was nothing left. But it was in the summertime and it's quite when you go to flip that pile, it's a bit nerve-wracking to know how much of the cow's going to be in there, and for the first couple turns, it's pretty fresh. So yeah, that would be some strategies there. If you're going to do it, you got to have lots of bedding, lots of straw, and like probably I would say like a 2 meters at least outside of wherever the animal is, because otherwise the coyotes and wild will like burrow into it. And so yeah, those are some thoughts there for that. Okay, we've got another question here from YouTube. When is the best time to graze amongst tree rows, shelter belts, so as not to damage them or to set them back? I haven't found it so much as a time of year as it is a size of the trees. Uh, and what's interesting is, so like you wouldn't want to put, you know, uh, cows or pigs in with seedlings that they're going to use as belly scratchers, uh, obviously, because they will snap them off. Another thing is bulls. Bulls will, I've seen them walk down a row of 20-foot poplars, like right through it, and use it as a belly scratcher, and they snap them all off. So a bull is very different than a dainty little Jersey dairy cow that almost tiptoes around the pasture. So you can think about the species and stuff with that. But yeah, in terms of a time of year, we do it for that one paddock I shared before. Like we've got in this piece here, you guys can see my screen.
Yeah.
In this 3-acre paddock here, there's a 5-row shelter belt that they have access to. There's spruce trees, there's lilacs, there's carragana, there's sea buckthorn, buffalo berry, and if I said maples already, they don't bother them. They eat the leaves of almost everything except for the spruce trees at different times of the year, and it's just fantastic. Like silvopasture, where you incorporating grazing animals with cropland is, in my opinion, one of the like they're a match made in heaven. It's so good, but you just got to wait until they're old enough so they don't hurt them. Okay. Don't you ferment your pig feed? Absolutely. We ferment all of our pig and chicken feed. I've got lots of videos on my YouTube channel. It's basically a sourdough starter that you're making. I ferment for typically 24 hours. Sometimes in the winter, when it's hard to keep it warm, I only do 20 or 12. But in the summertime, I ferment for 24 hours for the chickens and pigs. And it makes it more bioavailable, easier for them to digest, and just less feed waste. Fencing question from Megan. Wildlife pressure on fencing. What is the best option for elk? So if you don't want the elk like to damage it, high tensile electric is best. If you want to keep the elk out, you're going to need probably high mesh, like the 8-foot tall. Where is that? Like the 8-foot tall page wire, and where's a good image of it here? Like yeah, like this stuff, but 8 feet tall, but also electric, because even elk will climb these fences. I've heard of guys. However, I know that there's guys down in say like Colorado and Idaho where there's a ton of elk pressure. And they're not trying to keep the elk out. They're just trying to stop them from wrecking the fences. And they've had the best luck with just regular high tensile electric fence and making sure they never turn it off, so that eventually the elk get trained to just jump over the fences. But yeah, that'll be my recommendation. If you're trying to keep them out of a certain area, you got to mesh it. You got to go strong and tall and electric. I had clients in BC that built really expensive electric fence and for their hay yard, and elk would literally climb over it like zombies to get into the hay on the other side. So a couple electric wires would stop that pretty fast. Okay, we've got a question about aquaculture. Good. One of my favorite subjects. Do you think it's worthwhile to develop wood-fueled thermal battery systems in a greenhouse for aquaculture in cold, cloudy climates, perhaps in frames, greenhouses? Any ideas? I don't. I think aquaculture, in my opinion, only makes sense in exterior contexts where you can build ponds outside. It makes a lot of sense in warmer climates. There still are some opportunities for even cold climates. There's a fantastic book by William McLarney. It's called Freshwater Aquaculture, and it's mind blowing the productivity. Like you can get literally hundreds of pounds of fish in just like a few hundred square feet cage in a dugout per year with basically little to no feeding. The problem is in most provinces in Canada, it's illegal to stock fish because of the various pressure groups and special interest groups pushing the government to grant monopolies for fisheries like trout, basically. But if you happen to live in Ontario, there's certain species you can stock, wild species, absolutely. But in a greenhouse, I think it's too energy intensive. I think the risk is too high. I've been in cold climate greenhouses before where they've got they're beautiful. There's one in Edmonton I've toured once, had, like fig trees and bananas and fish and everything. And all it takes for the power to go out and the backup generator to fail, and you lose decades worth of work in a couple hours. So I would just never do it. I do have some YouTube videos about species that you can encourage. They're native species like fathead minnows or things like that are typically just in every pond anyways, and you're not going to get in trouble. But it's I think a $500,000 fine to stock perch or walleye or any other native fish in Alberta. If you're caught with more than 10 with a live fish more than 10 feet away from a water body, it's like a $500,000 fine. So I don't agree with the law. I think it's nonsense, but it's not a risk that I want to take to get involved with bureaucrats. However, fathead minnows, they'll show up and you build a pond, they'll be there anyways because they fly in on duck legs and stuff, and they're fantastic. And I've got lots of videos that I on my YouTube channel where I show how to use those for human food or even for chickens and pigs and stuff like that. But I'm generally not a fan of greenhouses, so maybe I'm the wrong guy to ask. But I think the energy return on investment is not there. I like to eat seasonally, and there's so many other amazing things that we can grow. I'd rather put my energy into that. But outside, absolutely, duckweed, cattails, fathead minnows, and if you live in other climates where you can stock native fish, 100%. I would if I was ever to move from Canada to the States, it would be for that reason, so that I could build aquaculture systems with crayfish, freshwater mussels, and just like in a food forest, there's fish and organisms that live at different layers of the pond. So there's top feeders, there's shore feeders, there's mid feeders, there's bottom feeders. There's even fish that like the grass carp that almost crawls out of the ground to graze. And you can design like a whole, almost like a food forest ecosystem for fish. And they are by far the most productive ecosystem on the planet. So if you happen to live in the States, Tyler, absolutely go for that. Okay, we've got two more questions here. How do you feel about the World Economic Forum's recent announcement that home gardens actually have a higher carbon footprint than conventional farms based on some study that they also published or they also funded? Do you think that our generation's higher interest in permaculture and homesteading, we're becoming a thorn in the eye of globalist collectivist agenda? Fantastic question. I think you answered it. Absolutely. To me, this is fantastic news. Like the fact that, one of the wealthiest, most powerful organizations in the world is coming after Granny in her garden is just fantastic. So well done. Round of applause to everybody for getting the target on our back. I think we're winning. They know it, and they'll have to try to use any scare tactic they can. It's just getting ridiculous. On a second thought, I'll say it's like even if they do produce higher carbon, fantastic. Carbon is the basis for life on this planet. I don't believe the agenda and the propaganda around greenhouse gases as the cause of global warming. I think it's utter nonsense. It's been totally debunked. So if it produces more carbon, fantastic. That just means we're producing more life. So either way, it's a massive positive in my opinion. And yeah, I would love to see them start arresting people for growing vegetables. I don't think that'll go well for Klaus Schwab's image. Okay, we got one other question here. It's a business question from Nick. And I think this is, if this is Nick that I'm thinking of from Golden, good to talk to you again, man. Is it possible for someone in 20 acres or less to generate $40,000 in income from a property with marginal soils and limited financial resources? Yeah, absolutely. Like our 250 acre farm generated gross sales was over $500,000 last year on our property. That's not net. There's a lot of input costs in there, but absolutely, there's and most of that income was generated on 20 acres or less of our 250 acre farm. Like most of the activity happens on about 20 acres, and the rest of it's just grazing. Now, with limited financial resources, that took us years to do. To build up the capital necessary to do that, but 100%. I mean, Curtis Stone has a video. He was producing $100,000 in a quarter acre, I think, in Kelowna. So you just got to pick your enterprises properly. So yeah, my 20 acres, I don't know your context there, but probably more like chickens, grazing, like milking animals, high value crops, if you're going to do that. Like one dairy cow at $20 a gallon produces, I think it's $14,000 worth of milk in a 6-month lactation at like 2 or 3 gallons a day. So get yourself 4 dairy cows and you're done. Our 150 chickens, they produce $15,000-$20,000 a year. My pigs, the 30 pigs that I have, that's another gross is basically $60,000 a year from the pigs. So yeah, absolutely no problem. With the limited financial resources, I would say don't skimp out, take out a loan, even at 10% interest. If you can get a loan, get it, put it into hard, precious metals, i.e. equipment, fencing, structures that will continue to generate value. It doesn't make sense to try to nickel and dime this stuff. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see homesteaders make, is they don't invest enough in the infrastructure, and they make up for it in labor. The most valuable thing you own is your time. Everyone on this planet is lucky to get 600,000 hours before we die, and so you're just counting down, and your card can get called at any time. There's no guarantee you're going to get 600,000 hours, but as a max, that's a good rule of thumb. And for most of that, you're in diapers on either end. So don't waste your life energy having inefficient systems. If you have to, get a part-time job, take out a loan, buy the right tool, buy the right equipment, design efficient systems. I've got YouTube videos that show like I can milk 2 cows, feed 30 pigs, and manage 150 chickens. That's like a $75,000 a year salary right there in an hour every morning. Now that system took, a decade to design and lots of infrastructure, but once it's done, it pays itself off. And so you have no trouble to pay off $100,000 loan to put in that kind of infrastructure. So that would be my recommendation there. Okay, folks, we just did 2 hours. Thank you so much for all your questions. Yeah, if folks enjoyed this, whether it was, Katie in your group or folks on YouTube, if people are getting value out of this, we'd love to do these more. So please give us feedback, sign up to our newsletter. You can send us emails. You can put messages in the comments here. Let us know what topics we can do focus. We're thinking about doing some like regular topics like this, where we'll like do a really focused one on fencing or a really focused one on milk cows, or if folks have other topics they'd like to do like a deep dive on, to help get this information out so that we can get bumped even higher on the watch list for the World Economic Forum. Okay, yeah, any closeout questions there, folks?
I think so. I think our heads are swimming. That was really
Okay.
excellent. Thank you.
Okay, you bet.
Thanks, Dakota.
Well, yeah, the whole thing's recorded, so it'll be on YouTube. We'll send a link out to everyone who signed up to our newsletter once the recording's up as well. Yeah, thank you guys so much for showing up. I don't know, Chris, how many folks do we have on YouTube Live? I've just been in the chat here, but I know we got a ton of great questions. Yeah, we had about 100 people on YouTube Live the whole time. So that's fantastic. And we'll keep doing this if there's interest like this. So tell your friends, and the next time it comes out, let's see if we can double those numbers. Okay,
Absolutely. All right. Take care.
take care,
Thank you.
folks. Bye.